The morning sun was bright, and the little cafe on the corner of the busy street was starting to fill up with its usual customers. People liked coming here because it was cozy, the coffee was rich, and the smell of fresh bread and pastries filled the air. It should have been a happy place where people enjoyed their mornings before going off to work, but every person who worked in the cafe carried a quiet fear in the back of their mind. There was one man who could change the entire atmosphere of the cafe in a matter of seconds, and that man was the millionaire. He was known all over the neighborhood not just because of his wealth but because of his temper and his rude ways. Whenever his expensive black car stopped outside, people felt their hearts sink. The waiters and waitresses would quickly whisper to each other, warning that he had arrived, and the manager would straighten his tie nervously, hoping no mistakes would be made. The millionaire had been coming to the cafe for months, almost every morning, and while the cafe was not the fanciest place in the city, he enjoyed being here because he liked the feeling of being in control. To him, it was not just a place to have coffee, it was a place where he could show his power. He would walk in with his loud shoes clicking against the floor, his expensive suit shining slightly under the lights, and his sharp eyes looking for any flaw. If the spoon was not polished enough, he would complain. If the coffee was not exactly to his liking, he would snap his fingers, calling for the staff as if they were his servants. The workers felt small in front of him, not because he truly had power over them, but because his words were sharp enough to cut their confidence. Even the customers who sat quietly with their laptops or books noticed the change in the air when he entered. A silence would settle, almost like a shadow falling across the room. Conversations that had been light and cheerful would lower in volume, and everyone would try to avoid making eye contact with him. People had seen too many times how he scolded the staff, how he spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear, and how no one dared to answer him back. In a way, the cafe became his stage, and the staff unwillingly became his audience. The workers often spoke about him in the back kitchen. Some would whisper that maybe it was better to leave the job than face his insults every day. Others said it was hopeless to try to please him because he would always find a reason to be unhappy. The manager tried to encourage them, saying, "Just do your best, stay calm, and remember, he is just one customer." But everyone knew that one customer carried enough weight to make the whole cafe feel heavy. There was one particular morning when the tension was especially strong. The staff had been warned that he might be in a bad mood because the stock market had taken a turn. Everyone was nervous. A young waiter accidentally dropped a fork on the floor while setting a table, and the sharp sound made the others jump, as if they expected the millionaire to appear suddenly and scold him. That was the kind of fear he created without even speaking. What made it worse was that the millionaire never showed any kindness. He never smiled at the staff, never thanked anyone, and never even acknowledged the effort they put into their work. For him, they were invisible people who existed only to serve him. And because of this, the cafe, which should have been a warm place of joy, sometimes felt like a place where everyone walked on eggshells. Customers who came often noticed the pattern. Some even pitied the workers but said nothing, afraid of getting caught in his storm themselves. One of the waitresses, an older woman who had been working there for years, told a new staff member, "You'll learn quickly. When he comes, don't talk too much. Just nod, agree, and leave as fast as you can. That's the safest way." It sounded like advice for dealing with danger, not just a regular customer. And yet, this was how the cafe had adapted to survive his visits. Still, beneath all this fear, there was also a quiet frustration. Many of the workers felt trapped. They wondered why they had to keep tolerating him. Some dreamed of standing up to him, of saying, "Enough is enough," but the thought quickly faded when they imagined the consequences. What if he caused them to lose their jobs? What if he used his influence to have the cafe shut down? These worries kept everyone silent. That morning, as the cafe continued its rhythm of clinking cups and steaming coffee machines, people could sense he was about to arrive. A hush fell over the staff even before his car pulled up. It was as if the cafe had developed a sixth sense for his presence. And sure enough, within moments, the familiar sound of his shoes echoed through the door. The glass door opened wide, and in he walked, tall, proud, and carrying himself as if the whole place belonged to him. His eyes scanned the room, and instantly, the energy shifted. A customer lowered her gaze to her coffee. A young man typing on his laptop quickly pretended to be deeply focused, hoping to avoid being noticed. The staff moved quicker, standing straighter, and the manager walked toward him with a nervous smile that looked more forced than genuine. The millionaire didn't greet anyone. He didn't have to. His presence was enough to command attention. He walked to his favorite corner table, snapping his fingers for service before he even sat down. The sound was sharp, disrespectful, but everyone knew what it meant. He wanted his coffee, and he wanted it now. A waiter rushed to his side, bowing slightly, almost stumbling in his haste. The millionaire ordered in his usual commanding tone, not even looking at the waiter as he spoke. Then, as always, he made a comment about how slow the service was or how the place should improve if it wanted to keep him as a customer. He said it loudly, making sure everyone in the cafe could hear. It was his way of reminding everyone that he was above them. The people around tried to ignore him, but inside, they felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. They wondered how long this would continue, how long one man could make so many people uncomfortable, and why no one ever said anything. Yet, despite these thoughts, the pattern repeated every day. He came, he demanded, he insulted, and he left. The cafe sighed in relief after his departure, only to dread his return the next morning. The truth was, everyone feared him not because he had real power over their lives but because his words had the strength to humiliate. He made people feel small, and no one liked to feel small. That was why the staff tiptoed around him and the customers avoided his gaze. The millionaire thrived on that silence. In his mind, it was proof that he was untouchable. But what no one in the cafe knew that morning was that change was coming. A new waitress would soon join them, and unlike the others, she would not be so easily shaken by his arrogance. The air of fear that had long settled over the cafe was about to be challenged. But for now, in that moment, the shadow of the rude millionaire still hung heavy over everyone, and they carried on with their day, unaware that the first crack in his power was just around the corner. The next morning began with the same routine inside the cafe, but there was also something slightly different in the air. The staff had been told the day before that a new waitress would be joining them. Everyone wondered quietly what she would be like, and more importantly, how she would handle the challenge of serving the rude millionaire if he came in that day. The older workers whispered to one another in the back, saying things like, "I hope she has patience," or, "She will learn soon enough what kind of customer she has to face here." Nobody expected her to be any different than the rest, because experience had taught them that the millionaire's presence could turn even the most confident person into someone nervous and silent. The young woman arrived right on time, her uniform neat and her smile calm. She was in her mid-20s, her steps graceful but steady as she walked in. There was a quiet strength about her, something in the way she held her shoulders back and looked people in the eye without hesitation. Her name was Clara, and while she had worked in other places before, this was her first day at this cafe. She had grown up in a modest family and was used to hard work. Nothing in her life had ever been handed to her easily, so she carried herself with the kind of dignity that came from resilience. The manager greeted her with his usual formal tone, giving her quick instructions about the cafe rules, the tables, and the menu. He tried to warn her gently about the challenges too, choosing his words carefully so as not to scare her off on the very first day. "We have a few difficult customers sometimes," he said, clearing his throat. "It's important to stay polite and professional no matter what." The way he said it made some of the older staff exchange glances, because they knew exactly who he was talking about. Clara nodded with quiet understanding, not asking many questions. She tied her apron neatly and started observing the flow of the cafe. She noticed how the staff moved quickly but cautiously, almost as if they were walking on a slippery floor. She saw the way some of them looked nervously at the door from time to time, waiting for something or someone to arrive. It didn't take long for her to realize that there was an invisible pressure in the air, something more than just the busyness of a cafe. Her first few hours went smoothly. She carried trays of coffee with steady hands, served croissants with a warm smile, and remembered customer orders easily. Several customers immediately noticed her attentiveness and friendly attitude. She spoke kindly to an elderly man who always sat by the window and helped a young mother balance her baby while handing over a warm cup of tea. Everything about her seemed natural, as if she belonged there already. But then, just before noon, it happened. The sound of an expensive car parking outside made the staff tense. The air shifted once again, the way it always did. Clara noticed how the workers suddenly became stiffer, their faces worried. Some customers looked up, then quickly returned to their cups, as if preparing for an unpleasant interruption. The glass door swung open, and the rude millionaire walked in with his usual air of entitlement. His shoes clicked loudly on the floor, and his sharp eyes scanned the cafe as though he were checking whether everything was up to his standard. Clara watched quietly as her co-workers lowered their gazes. The manager rushed to greet him, his smile too forced, his hands slightly trembling. The millionaire barely acknowledged him, already snapping his fingers for service as he headed toward his favorite corner table. Clara saw the way everyone reacted to him, and for a moment she felt the heavy energy he brought into the room. It was strange to her, how one man could silence an entire cafe. She had seen difficult customers before, but never one who seemed to cast such a shadow. Still, she did not let it shake her. She reminded herself that he was just another person, no matter how rich or rude. The manager whispered to one of the senior waiters, urging him to serve the millionaire quickly. But the cafe was busy at that moment, and the waiter already had 3 tables to handle. In the small rush of confusion, Clara stepped forward. She carried her notepad, walked with steady steps to his table, and stood waiting politely. The millionaire glanced at her, surprised to see a new face. He raised his eyebrows, then spoke in his usual commanding tone. "Black coffee. Extra hot. And don't take all day." His voice was sharp, dismissive, as if he were speaking to someone beneath him. Clara nodded, her expression calm. "Certainly, sir," she said, her voice respectful but firm. She did not shrink back like the others usually did, nor did she show signs of nervousness. She simply walked back to the counter, placed the order, and returned with his coffee in just a few minutes. Her movements were steady, her hands never trembling. When she set the cup down, the millionaire frowned and said loudly, "This better not be as terrible as yesterday's. I don't have time for mistakes." His words were intended not just for her but for the entire cafe to hear. A couple of customers exchanged uncomfortable glances, while the staff froze, waiting to see how Clara would react. To their surprise, she simply looked at him with calm eyes and replied in the same polite but unwavering tone, "I hope it is to your liking. If there is any issue, please let me know, and I'll take care of it right away." Her words were simple, but the way she said them carried strength. She was not pleading or fearful. She was professional but unshaken. The millionaire paused, not used to such a response. Normally, his words caused people to stumble over apologies or rush to assure him. But Clara's steady manner gave him nothing to feed on. He muttered something under his breath and took a sip of the coffee. To his mild annoyance, it was perfectly fine. He could not complain, though he looked as if he wanted to. The rest of the staff watched quietly, amazed. They had expected her to return looking nervous, but instead she carried herself with the same calmness as before. Even the customers noticed the difference. For the first time in a long while, the air did not feel so heavy around the millionaire's table. Clara continued her work, serving other customers with the same grace. She did not speak badly of him, nor did she let his presence affect her pace. When he snapped his fingers again for a refill, she returned promptly but without losing her calm demeanor. Every small action she took seemed to send a quiet message: she would serve with respect, but she would not be diminished. By the end of the hour, whispers had already begun among the staff. "Did you see her? She didn't even flinch," one waiter said to another. "She served him like he was just any other customer." The older waitress who had warned Clara earlier shook her head in disbelief. "Maybe she doesn't understand yet," she whispered, but deep down, she felt something different too. The millionaire, meanwhile, sat at his table, strangely unsettled. He had gotten his coffee, his service, everything he usually demanded, but something about this new waitress bothered him. He couldn't quite place it, but it was the fact that she had not been shaken by him. His usual power, the ability to make others nervous and small, had not worked this time. And though he didn't show it openly, it gnawed at him quietly as he prepared to leave. When he finally walked out, the cafe let out a silent sigh of relief as it always did. But this time, there was also a spark of curiosity in the air. Something new had happened. A new person had entered their world, and she had not bowed under the weight of fear. For the first time, the idea that maybe, just maybe, the millionaire was not as untouchable as he seemed began to grow in the minds of the staff. And Clara, walking back to the counter with her calm steps, had no idea that her presence had already started to shift the balance of the cafe. The following day, the cafe felt unusually tense from the very start. Even before the doors opened, the workers whispered among themselves about what might happen next. Clara had surprised everyone with her calmness and her ability to face the millionaire without losing her dignity. Some staff thought it was only luck that he had not pushed her too far. Others wondered if she had some hidden strength that none of them had ever dared to show. The manager, while impressed, worried quietly in the back of his mind. He knew that people like the millionaire did not like being ignored or resisted. He knew that if the man felt his power slipping, he might try to prove himself even more the next time. And that next time was already on its way. By mid-morning, the cafe had filled with its usual mix of people: office workers grabbing a quick coffee before heading back to their jobs, students with laptops open, and a couple of older locals who liked to sit for hours, sipping slowly while watching life go by. The smell of roasted beans and warm bread floated through the air, mixing with the hum of quiet conversations. Everything seemed peaceful until the door opened and the sound of polished shoes echoed once again on the floor. The millionaire had arrived. As always, the shift was immediate. The chatter softened, the workers moved more quickly, and even the air felt heavier. But Clara, wiping down a nearby table, did not flinch. She simply set the cloth aside, straightened her apron, and prepared herself for whatever was to come. The millionaire walked in with his usual pride, his sharp eyes scanning the cafe. When he saw Clara, he paused for a moment, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Ah," he said loudly enough for the room to hear, "so the new girl is still here. I thought maybe one day would have been enough for her." His voice carried the edge of mockery, and the staff froze in silence. Clara approached his table with her notepad, her calm expression never changing. "Good morning, sir. Will it be the usual coffee today?" she asked, her tone polite but steady. He leaned back in his chair, looking at her as if he were trying to measure her. "Yes, the usual. But I expect it exactly the way I want it. Last time, it was barely acceptable." His words were sharp, designed to humiliate, but Clara only nodded, writing the order without a flicker of fear. When she returned with the steaming cup, she set it gently in front of him. He lifted it to his lips, took a slow sip, then set it down with an exaggerated sigh. "Too hot," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the cafe. How many times must I tell you people that I don't want my tongue burned? His complaint was dramatic, and a few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The other waiters froze, waiting for Clara's reaction. She looked at him with calm eyes and replied softly, "I'm sorry if it is too hot, sir. It was made fresh, as coffee usually is. If you would like, I can bring you some cold milk to adjust it." Her words were gentle but carried an unmistakable firmness. She was not cowering. She was offering a solution instead of an apology that begged for forgiveness. The millionaire's smirk faded for a moment. He had expected her to stumble, to panic, maybe even to beg. Instead, she stood steady, her words calm but sure. "Bring the milk then," he said finally, his voice less confident than before. Clara returned with the milk, placed it on the table, and gave a small nod. The millionaire poured it in, his eyes still locked on her, as if searching for a crack in her composure. But there was none. She simply moved on to serve the next table, her steps even and unhurried. The cafe had gone quiet, the workers and customers alike watching this quiet clash unfold. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was powerful in its own way. Everyone could see that Clara had not been shaken. The millionaire, used to making others feel small, had been forced into a normal exchange like any other customer. For the first time, he looked unsettled. But he was not ready to give up. A few minutes later, he tapped his spoon loudly against his cup, drawing Clara's attention. "This place has gotten worse since you started," he said, his voice sharp. "The service is slower. The staff looks lazier. Maybe you've set a bad example." He looked around, making sure the other workers could hear his insult. The staff held their breath, afraid of what would come next. Clara walked to his table, standing tall. She leaned slightly forward and spoke in a clear but quiet voice, loud enough for him to hear but calm enough not to create a scene. "Sir, I believe everyone here works very hard to make this cafe a good place. We are here to serve you, yes, but we also deserve respect. I will continue to do my best for you, but speaking badly of others is not fair." The words hung in the air like a stone dropped in water. A silence spread through the cafe. Customers looked up, surprised, while the staff stared with wide eyes. Nobody had ever spoken to the millionaire this way. For a moment, the man's face darkened. He opened his mouth as if to shout, but then he caught the eyes of the people around him. Customers were no longer pretending not to hear. They were watching him, their expressions unreadable but heavy with judgment. The other staff members stood a little taller behind Clara, their shoulders no longer hunched in fear. The millionaire realized that if he made a scene now, he would not win the respect he craved. He would only look foolish. So instead of exploding, he leaned back in his chair and gave a short, cold laugh. "You're braver than the rest," he muttered. "We'll see how long that lasts." Then he lifted his cup and drank his coffee in silence. The cafe slowly returned to its rhythm, but the air felt different now. Customers whispered quietly to each other, some nodding in approval. The staff exchanged glances filled with surprise and admiration. Clara continued her work as if nothing unusual had happened, but inside, she knew something had shifted. She had not raised her voice, she had not shown anger, but she had stood her ground. And in doing so, she had broken the silence that had chained the cafe for so long. When the millionaire finally stood to leave, he did not speak another word. He walked out with his usual pride, but there was a stiffness in his shoulders that had not been there before. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like a release, and for the first time, the cafe did not sigh in fear but in quiet triumph. That day, the workers looked at Clara differently. They saw her not just as the new waitress, but as someone who had given them a glimpse of freedom. She had shown them that the millionaire was not unbeatable, that his power was only as strong as the fear people gave him. And though none of them said it aloud, hope flickered in their hearts. The next morning, the cafe opened its doors to the usual crowd of early risers. The smell of fresh coffee beans being ground and bread baking in the oven filled the air, and for a while, everything seemed calm and ordinary. But underneath the routine, there was a new energy flowing quietly between the workers. The events of the previous day had left a strong mark. Clara had stood up to the rude millionaire in her calm, steady way, and everyone had witnessed it. Though she had spoken with politeness, there was no mistaking the firmness in her words. For the first time in a long while, the staff had seen someone push back, not with anger but with dignity. They didn't talk about it openly at first. While preparing trays and cleaning tables, some of the workers gave Clara subtle looks of admiration. The older waitress who had once warned her about the millionaire now found herself replaying Clara's words in her mind. Even the young waiter who usually dropped things out of nervousness seemed to move with a bit more confidence, as if he had borrowed some of Clara's strength. The cafe had lived under a shadow for so long that a single moment of courage felt like sunlight peeking through the clouds. Customers, too, had noticed. A few of the regulars came in that morning and whispered quietly among themselves about what they had seen. One man said softly to his friend, "That new waitress has spirit. Did you see how she handled him?" A woman at the counter nodded, adding, "She didn't insult him, but she didn't let him crush her either. I've never seen anything like that here." These conversations spread slowly, giving the cafe a different atmosphere than usual. Still, no one was sure what would happen next. Everyone knew the millionaire well enough to understand he would not simply let the matter go. His pride was too large, his need for control too strong. The staff braced themselves, wondering if he would come back even harsher to prove his dominance. The thought of another confrontation made them nervous, but this time, there was also a flicker of anticipation. Deep down, they wanted to see what Clara would do. When his car finally pulled up outside, the usual hush fell over the room. The clinking of spoons against cups slowed, conversations softened, and the staff stood straighter. But the fear was not as heavy as before. Instead, there was a strange mix of curiosity and quiet support. The millionaire stepped in, dressed as sharply as ever, his eyes already searching the room. He walked with the same air of authority, but something about his presence felt different now. Maybe it was because people were watching him more openly, no longer pretending not to see him. His gaze landed on Clara, and a flicker of irritation crossed his face. He walked to his table, snapping his fingers as usual, and waited for service. Clara approached with her calm steps, her notepad ready. "Good morning, sir," she said in her clear, polite voice. "Would you like your usual coffee today?" He looked up at her, narrowing his eyes. "Yes. But let's see if you can get it right this time. Yesterday, it was nearly a disaster." His voice was sharp, but there was an edge of frustration in it, as if he already knew he wouldn't get the reaction he wanted. Clara nodded simply, writing down the order without flinching. "Certainly, sir," she said, before walking back to prepare the coffee. Customers nearby exchanged glances, already sensing the tension rising, but there was also admiration in their eyes. They knew this was no ordinary waitress. When Clara returned with the coffee, she set it down gently. The millionaire lifted it, took a sip, and then leaned back with a mocking laugh. "Barely acceptable," he announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "This place is falling apart. The staff is clumsy, the service is slow, and now you think you can lecture me on respect? You should be grateful I even stepped foot in here." The cafe went silent. The staff froze, and customers looked on with wide eyes. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Would Clara bow under the weight of his words, or would she stand firm again? Clara looked at him steadily, her expression calm but serious. Her voice, when she spoke, carried through the cafe, not loud but strong enough for everyone to hear. "Sir, we are grateful for every customer who visits us, including you. but gratitude does not mean we must accept unkindness. Everyone here works hard to serve, and kindness costs nothing. If the service is not to your liking, we are always ready to improve, but respect must go both ways. Her words spread across the cafe like a ripple. Customers lifted their heads, some nodding quietly, others smiling faintly. The staff looked at her with a mixture of shock and pride. No one had ever dared to speak such truth to the millionaire, and yet Clara's tone was not harsh, it was steady, professional, and dignified. The millionaire's face turned red, his pride wounded in front of an audience. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but when he glanced around, he saw the eyes of the cafe fixed on him. No one looked afraid anymore. Some customers stared at him disapprovingly, others with curiosity, and the staff stood taller than usual, silently standing with Clara. The atmosphere had shifted, and for the first time, he realized he was no longer in control. He gave a short, bitter laugh and muttered, "This place doesn't deserve my time." But even as he said it, he stayed seated, sipping his coffee in silence. The words that had once silenced the cafe now fell flat. Clara had broken the spell, and the cafe no longer bowed to his arrogance. For the rest of his visit, the air felt lighter. Conversation slowly returned, customers smiled at Clara as she moved around, and the staff carried on with more confidence than before. The millionaire sat stiffly in his chair, clearly unsettled by the shift. He was no longer the center of attention, no longer the shadow over the room. When he finally stood to leave, he walked out without a word, his shoulders heavy with a pride that had been cracked. The sound of the door closing felt different this time, more final, as though a chapter had ended. The cafe breathed freely. Some customers clapped softly, others murmured words of praise. The staff exchanged smiles, relief and pride shining in their faces. The older waitress who had once warned Clara shook her head in wonder and whispered, "She's changed everything." Clara, however, did not smile triumphantly. She simply continued clearing tables, her calmness steady as ever. She had not stood up to him to win applause or attention. She had done it because she believed everyone deserved respect, no matter who they were. And though she said nothing about it, her presence had transformed the cafe. Where there had once been fear, there was now courage. Where there had once been silence, there was now unity. The millionaire might return again, perhaps even angrier, but the spell of fear was broken. The cafe had seen that dignity could stand taller than arrogance, and no one would ever forget the moment when one young waitress reminded them all that respect was stronger than wealth. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to the cafe. The workers who once walked on eggshells now moved with more ease. Their shoulders seemed lighter, their steps quicker, and even their smiles appeared more natural. Clara's presence had given them something they had been missing for so long: confidence. They no longer whispered warnings to each other every morning, no longer carried the heavy dread of waiting for the millionaire to arrive. Instead, they worked with quiet pride, knowing they had witnessed something that had changed the atmosphere forever. Customers noticed the difference too. The cafe felt warmer, freer, and more welcoming. Conversations no longer died when the door opened. Laughter was easier, the clinking of cups livelier. Some customers who had stopped coming because of the tense environment returned, curious to see if the stories they had heard were true. Word spread quickly, and more people visited, not just for the food or coffee but to be part of the cafe where a young woman had stood up with calm dignity to a man everyone once feared. Of course, the millionaire did not disappear. His pride was too great to allow him to simply walk away forever. A few days later, his car returned to its familiar spot, and the cafe grew quiet for a moment. But the silence was no longer filled with fear, it was filled with expectation. People wondered what he would do this time and how Clara would handle him. He stepped inside with his usual polished shoes and confident stride, but his presence no longer commanded the same reaction. The staff did not bow their heads or rush nervously to him. Customers looked at him openly, some even with amused expressions. He noticed the change immediately, and though his face was calm, inside he felt the sting of losing control. Clara approached his table as she always did, her voice polite and steady. "Good morning, sir. Would you like your usual coffee today?" she asked. The millionaire gave a tight smile, as if searching for a way to regain his lost authority. "Yes," he said slowly, his voice carrying a forced calmness. "Make sure it's perfect. I don't want another lecture with my drink." His words were meant to bite, but they fell flat against the hum of the cafe. Clara only nodded and replied, "Of course, sir," before walking back to the counter. She did not add fuel to his bitterness. She did not allow his words to shake her. When she returned with the coffee, she placed it gently on the table and gave a small, respectful smile before moving on. The millionaire sipped the coffee, clearly searching for a reason to complain. But it was flawless. He tapped his fingers on the table, waiting for someone to react to him, but no one did. The staff moved confidently, serving other customers, and the people around him carried on with their conversations. He was no longer the center of attention, and the realization cut deeper than any words. For the first time, he felt what it was like to be ordinary in that cafe. And strangely, instead of raging, he grew quiet. He sat in silence, drinking his coffee slowly, his eyes drifting across the room. He noticed the smiles of customers, the way the staff laughed softly with one another, and the calm expression on Clara's face as she worked. Something stirred inside him, though he did not admit it. When he finished his cup, he stood up without a word and walked out. This time, the door closed gently behind him, not with the heavy slam of authority. The cafe remained alive with warmth and light chatter, unaffected by his presence. From that day onward, his visits grew less frequent. He still came sometimes, but each time he entered, the fear was gone. The workers served him as they served anyone else, and Clara's calm strength became a shield for them all. Customers, too, treated him like just another man at a table, not a force to be feared. The power he once held over the cafe dissolved quietly, not with a dramatic ending, but with the steady strength of dignity that had taken root. Clara never boasted about what she had done. She never told the story as a victory or claimed she had changed anything. She simply kept working, carrying trays, serving drinks, and smiling kindly at those who came through the door. But everyone else knew the truth. She had broken the silence that had bound them for so long. Over time, the cafe's reputation grew. People said it was a place of warmth and respect, a place where workers stood tall and customers felt welcome. Regulars brought friends, and new faces became loyal visitors. The staff, once nervous and timid, now worked with confidence, proud of the environment they had built together. The older waitress often said quietly to others, "It all started with her. She gave us our courage back." As for the millionaire, he became a quieter figure. Some said he had learned something from Clara's calm resistance. Others believed he simply grew tired of fighting a battle he could no longer win. Whatever the reason, he no longer ruled the cafe. His presence, once so heavy, faded into the background like the clink of a spoon in a cup. And so, the cafe found peace again. It was not just about one confrontation or one moment, but about the shift that dignity and respect can create when someone dares to stand firm. The story of Clara and the millionaire spread quietly through the neighborhood, told with admiration by customers and workers alike. It was not the story of anger or rebellion, but the story of calm courage, of one young woman who showed that respect was stronger than wealth and kindness more powerful than fear. The cafe returned to what it was always meant to be, a place of warmth, laughter, and community. And in the corner where the millionaire once sat, people now gathered freely, talking and smiling, no longer afraid of shadows. The memory of what had happened remained, not as a burden, but as a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage can change everything.